The following contains minor spoilers for the book and movie versions of Howl's Moving Castle. You have been warned. Greetings, fellow mortals. Believe it or not, I actually do like reading, despite the fact that all of my videos usually tend to focus on movies, TV shows, and video games. I have a rule to force myself to read a little bit each day. If at most I can only do 10 pages on the really difficult days, then at least I'm making some form of progress. It can be a slow process sometimes. 2022 has been a bit of a rough year for me, but I've managed to keep my goals despite everything that's happened. Building a habit and keeping that habit tends to help me push through these moments of low motivation. For the most part, I like to read fantasy books. It's the genre that I like the most because that's what I tend to write myself. As such, I like to read and learn from those that came before me. A book that I managed to get through a few years ago was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Now, it is a children's book, so I shouldn't have gone in expecting something to my level of taste. I think that the problem was that I loved the movie so much. In fact, I think that the film was far better than the book in almost every conceivable way. If you don't know, Howl's Moving Castle is the story of Sophie Hatter. She is a young woman that works in her family's hat shop. One day she gains the attention of the wizard Howl. Enraged that Howl was paying attention to another woman, the Witch of the Waste casts a curse on Sophie to turn the young Hatter into an old woman. Realizing that she can't stay with her family anymore, Sophie journeys out to find a way to undo the curse. During her trek, she finds herself in a moving castle belonging to Howl. Once there, she makes a deal with the fire demon Calcifer. If she finds a way to remove his and Howl's curse, then Calcifer will remove her curse in return. To start out, I would like to say that there are parts of the book that I really like. In fact, there are some parts that I prefer in the book compared to the movie. Diana Wynne Jones put more of a focus on the main character's family. Not only that, Sophie has a bit of magical ability of her own in the book. Her power isn't anything grand, but I always like when characters have some sort of special ability. I always prefer when the main character has something unique about them to help them stand out. I want them to feel significant in their own story. Of course, that is a personal preference. Having a weak protagonist overcome the odds, or a bland main character for people to insert themselves into, are also viable options for storytelling. Besides those two examples and the cute tone of the book, I find myself always favoring the movie. Now, this is a bit odd for me. Usually I tend to like the book way before the movie. I'll be the first to admit that movies aren't my favorite medium. They feel a lot more limited in stories that they can tell because of the time constraints. Not to say that there aren't great movies. I could sit here and name plenty of fantastic films. In fact, I know that there are plenty of people who say that movies are their favorite form of entertainment. That's fine. It's just that movies aren't my cup of tea in comparison to the other mediums for storytelling. I always tend to think that books tell the story better. Howl's Moving Castle proves to be a huge exception to my usual rule. Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli did a fantastic job adapting the book. They animated the film just like I would have pictured the book in my head. Just like the animation, the music is stunning. The casting and writing are fantastic as well. There's a magical feeling about the world that many other directors and studios would have failed to capture. If anyone isn't familiar with their other work, such as Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Princess Mononoke, for example, then you should go and watch those as well. But those are stories that deserve their own videos. Now, you might be curious as to what about the movie makes it better than the book in my mind. It actually comes down to one fact about the two different versions of Sophie. While the Sophie Hatter in the book does have magic powers involved when she makes hats, she doesn't come off as the main character forging her own story. Generally speaking, things happen around Sophie in the book. She might react or comment on the events occurring, but there are only a few times where she makes the decision to push the plot forward. She has an intense lack of agency. A sense of agency is very important for characters, especially the main character. If a character's decisions don't drive the story forward, then they feel like leaves in the wind. They're just being dragged wherever the plot feels like they need to go. Not to say that such a story can't work. The problem with the book version of Howl's Moving Castle is that Sophie Hatter tends to just be an observer. She stays in the moving castle most of the time. She cleans and watches the events of the world. Sometimes she'll venture out because of other people, but it never feels as though she's making a decision that will change the shape of the story. In the movie, on the other hand, Sophie does make decisions. She does try to act. She makes mistakes and gets into arguments and fights. Not to say that she's the only one completely driving the plot. There is a war going on during the time of the film, after all. There's little that a hat maker turned cleaning lady can do about that. The film does give a sense that she's actively trying to solve her own problems, though. Sophie works hard, gains confidence, and is the driving decision maker at the climax of the film. The same can't exactly be said for the book. It feels more like Howl is the main character at the climax of the book. Now, you might argue that that makes sense. The book is called Howl's Moving Castle, not Sophie's Moving Castle, but the reader always follows Sophie's perspective throughout the entire story. That makes it harder to get invested in the tale when she stands around and simply shrugs as things happen around her. I think that character decisions should drive the plot forward as much as possible when it comes to stories. That could be a preference, but characters without agency don't tend to be remembered as fondly as characters that do have agency. Of course, not every change that Miyazaki made is better. I wouldn't call them worse either. They're just different. The biggest issue is how the book and the film handles the Witch of the Waste. Miyazaki doesn't tend to create purely evil characters in his movies. Instead, he likes to create complicated situations where the state of humanity, industrialization, and war are the problems. I won't spoil too much about anything from either the book or the movie. I think that you should experience both and decide which plot you like better. They both do end relatively the same. Actually, I could see people arguing that the book's ending is a bit better simply because it incorporates Sophie's family into the equation. It also solves a lot of problems simply by characters being honest about their feelings. At the same time, I always do like when villains get redeemed in some way, so it would have to come down to personal preference, and I can't particularly say which ending I like more. It would depend on the day. Now, you might criticize my mindset. Perhaps Diana Wynne Jones was trying to represent what it might feel like as a woman in times of peril, especially elderly women. Perhaps she was trying to represent the feeling of helplessness in the face of astronomical problems. The book did come out in 1986 after all. Maybe that's how Diana felt at the time. Maybe that's how a lot of women feel during times of war. We're creeping closer to the point where the book is 40 years old after all. It was a different world back then, and I am a man. It's not exactly like I have a woman's viewpoint when it comes to how they feel about war and times of peril. While I can admit that I don't know everything, I can also point out that there are several other older books where women have agency. Jane Eyre, The Scarlet Letter, Gone with the Wind, and Pride and Prejudice. While not always in positions of power, the female characters in those older books do make decisions that affect the plot. Sophie Hatter's tendency to simply watch the world around her in Howl's Moving Castle felt almost comical at times. It doesn't make for a really interesting read. I don't have many other criticisms for the book. It's cute, has a fun world, and is an interesting plot. My favorite part of it all is that the interpersonal problems get resolved with simple conversations, just like in real life. Of course, you could have a different opinion. Maybe you prefer the book. Feel free to comment below why you like the book more, or perhaps you have a different reason to like the movie more. I'm always open to hearing other perspectives. I just know that I like it when stories have their characters have a sense of agency that affects the world around them. Oftentimes, real life feels like there are just a bunch of random events that you have to react to. I like having control over the things which I can change about my life. And storytelling is a big part of my life. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my takes on storytelling, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It would really help me out. Also, remember that I will be self-publishing my novel, Dance of Frozen Death, at the start of 2023. I hope that you will check it out. I appreciate you. Do not despair.